Ukraine on edge. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy sounding the alarm, warning that Putin's attack on Ukraine is not over, bracing for what will come next. It comes after Russia's massive and widespread strikes overnight. We have some dramatic new footage. You can see that there. More than 400 drones, 40 missiles fired across 9 regions. And these are the scenes from Kyiv, where explosions lit up the sky. This is one of the largest attacks of the war so far. The strikes, it seems, a part of the response to Ukraine taking out so many of Russia's strategic bombers. They say 41 of Putin's bombers destroyed, all carried out by drones. A weapon that Ukraine, of course, has used to completely redefine warfare itself. Katie Poglaze is out front with a CNN investigation into exactly how they're doing it right now.
This attack, more than 18 months in the making, is a sign of how Ukraine has changed the face of modern warfare, damaging air bases deep within Russian territory. A CNN analysis of thousands of drone strikes on Russia over the past 3 years, along with video and an exclusive interview.
We can coordinate our drones in Moscow, etc.
Sheds light on how Ukraine's drone program has rapidly expanded since the start of the war. In the first months, you can see the attacks are mainly along the border area, but by the end of the year, they start hitting key military targets, like this blast shown on surveillance footage at a fuel depot at Engels Air Base in December 2022. 5 months later, and the missions become more ambitious. This bold drone attack in May 2023 even damaged the roof of the Kremlin, the heart of the Russian government, and over 400 miles from Kyiv. Drones are now frequently flying over Moscow, bringing the terror of war home to the Russian people. At the same time, Ukraine is maintaining pressure on Russia's war supplies wherever they are stored. In late summer of 2023, they target Pskov Air Base in northern Russia, beyond Moscow. In satellite imagery taken shortly after, you can see the damaged planes. By 2024, the number of drones getting sent into Russia is soaring. In June alone, over 1,000 launched, according to CNN analysis. Ukraine's muscle comes from a coordinated national effort to make combat drones ready to be sent into Russia. We spoke exclusively to one of these manufacturers who told us how the war kick-started Ukraine's national drone unit.
Now I think Ukraine is leader in this area in our world.
Which drones were used last weekend is still a tight-lipped secret. But experts say his drones are identical to those seen in images of the attack and were most likely the ones used.
We can produce very good drones for special mission, and we will protect our country from Russian aggression.
He shares some extraordinary insights into how it was possible for Ukraine to target so deep into Russia, hitting an airbase 2,500 miles away. Is it possible to remote control that drone from Ukraine while the drone was in Valeriy Air Base, for example?
No problem. We can coordinate our drones in Moscow, etc. We need to link across satellite, across mobile towers, or maybe our pilot will stay near Kremlin.
And the success of the program is apparent by the damage left behind. Multiple air bases hit, some in Russia's far east. Ukraine claims it inflicted $7 billion worth of damage on Russian weaponry, though that number has not been verified. Even so, the details of this stealthy operation are extraordinary. Drones smuggled in on wooden crates, then driven across Russia in containers, catching locals by surprise as drones flew out of trucks to launch the assaults. Russia now faces an even steeper challenge to its long-held dominance of the skies. Katie Poglaze, CNN, London.
All right, and joining me now is Seth Jones, national security expert and president of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So, Seth, you have just returned from reviewing frontline drone footage. You've done that with top military leadership from Ukraine. So you've seen things that none of us have actually seen. What stands out to you from that, from what you saw, from what you heard about what really happened on those air bases?
Well, Aaron, what is really stunning is how the Ukrainians used the Russian logistics system, including their mobile network, to smuggle drones into Russia itself, and then to use the mobile system and the satellite system from Russian territory as they conducted strikes. So, I mean, it's not just getting those platforms into Russian territory, but it's also taking advantage of what was available in Russia to strike targets. I mean, it really shows how vulnerable countries can be if those kinds of drones are smuggled inside of those countries, obviously more than just Russia.
Right. Well, and that, in that sense, a very sobering thing you just said there. So when you're with that top military leadership, though, and, you know, we had those big attacks overnight, some of the biggest since the war began in Kyiv. Is that it? I mean, what do they think Putin is going to do? I mean, Trump made it very clear that Putin was going to do something big and that ceasefire's off, and which it was never really on, but you get the point. What does Ukraine think is going to happen?
Well, Aaron, I think there are a few things. One is the Ukrainian leadership, and I talked to the head of the Office of the President while he was in Washington this week. They do expect the Russians to conduct a range of cruise missile, ballistic missile, and drone strikes against cities, including Kyiv, in large numbers. That's the way the Russians respond. I don't think they expect to see any kind of a nuclear response, although Putin routinely threatens those. But I think at the end of the day, the problem that the Russians have is they are not effectively conducting military operations. They're dying in really historic numbers, at least since World War II. And so I think that's the Ukrainian response, is to keep fighting them on the ground. And that's where the Russians really are at their biggest weakness. Okay, so on that, you know, we haven't heard that sort of an argument in a while. In fact, what we've heard is that in a war of attrition, Russia will win because they have more men. And it's just that simple. And that it boils down to numbers, and the numbers are horrible, but they don't favor Ukraine. So the longer this continues, the more it favors Russia, right? That has become the narrative, right, out there. But you've got new reporting, and you're talking about struggles on the front line for Putin's forces to advance. You've got numbers on the equipment, that they've lost a lot more equipment than Ukraine, that the casualty numbers now approach 1 million for Russia. In fact, you gave us a chart that shows the daily average of casualties since the war began. And it all challenges the narrative that Putin can just continue and afford to go on indefinitely. You know, when you went through and looked at all these numbers right now, which do challenge the current narrative, what surprised you the most? Aaron, there were two things that surprised me, and one of them was one of the numbers that the president himself remarked out of our report in the Oval Office yesterday. One was just the sheer casualties that the Russians have suffered. Nearly 1 million. They'll hit the 1 million mark by June or July. And also in a historical perspective, the Russians have lost now more than 5 times the number of soldiers than in all Russian wars combined between the end of World War II and the beginning of their full-scale invasion in February 2022. I mean, 77-year period versus a 3-year period, a little over 3-year period, still 5 times the number that they've lost over the last 3 years. I mean, it's just stunning in its significance. And also, the other thing that was interesting in what we found was how little territory and how slow the advance of the Russians has been, slower than some of the most grinding and grisly offensive during World War I.
Wow. And you know, when we hear about those, and just the sheer death and suffering in that war, trench warfare, where, of course, it's trench warfare here again. Seth, thank you so much.
Thanks, Aaron.